Have you ever used the 9th overall pick on a running back?
I haven't. I don't think you're going to find me doing it. But look, man, we got a few months to figure that out. You got a few months to convince me there, Brett Veach.
What do you want to see be happening done at the 9th pick overall for the Kansas City Chiefs? Because I'm in love with Bain from Miami. I don't think he lasts that long, but I want a massive, powerful defensive end.
I was just firing up, and look, thank God we got a mock draft, because there might not be any more between now and April, but I was just looking at the ESPN mock, and it's Bain at 9, and I think that makes a ton of sense. I think for me, I've got I have the smart investment and the kind of like wishful thinking that would make me even more excited but might not be the wisest. I would be really happy with either of the top 2 wide receivers, either Carnell Tate or Jordan Tyson, or I think David Bailey or Ruben Bain. Now, again, the like arm length and the scheme fit and all of that, I'll admit right now, I'm watching college football. I am not doing the draft prep and the nitty gritty yet, so that might change as the weeks and months go on. But I think a defensive lineman is the biggest need, and it fits the value of the pick. And I think wide receiver is a sneaky big need. And I don't know, you could throw tight end in there as well, but 9's kind of a weird no man's land there. I like Sadiq, but I don't think that you want to probably spend a top 10 pick there. I think that wide receiver is sneakily important, and it's really hard to get a blue chip wide receiver outside of the top 10, but that's also true for the defensive line, and they really need to add another horse on that defensive line. A real blue chip player would be such a big deal.
How much of this conversation do you think is going to be totally different after free agency happens? And I say free agency, trade, free agency, period,
sure. I think it will be different, but I actually think that because of the nature of where you're making the pick, obviously they're going to end up having, and I think Veach has done this every year, they're going to end up having a reasonable 53-man roster before the draft comes around. And so I do think they have to add 2 running backs. So you have to add a free agent and a rookie, like it's in some form or fashion. You're going to have to really overhaul the defensive line room in a number of ways. So I think that, and obviously whatever happens with the corners, that will change some things, but I don't think it will change the conversation at number 9 very much. I guess Brian Cook could end up impacting things a little bit, but you don't want to end up in a place where you're saying, okay, well, we're either going to get Caleb Downs at 9 or we're not going to have a safety we love back there. So I think it will be, the edges will be softened. There will be a running back on this roster who you feel all right about, so it's not love or bust. You will have defensive linemen on this roster who you can say, okay, well, George Karlaftis and Chris Jones and free agent 1 and free agent 2, they can kind of set the floor for you with Gelati and Omar Norman-Lott or whatever, but you're going to need to add another guy that has a higher ceiling than that. So obviously a lot of those spots will be filled out. The roster will be rounded a little bit, but I think the need at the top is going to remain because I don't think there is an answer at defensive line or wide receiver that they can get on the free agent market, which I think is why those positions feel so clear to me.
Yeah, but also, too, you say free agent market. I'm not saying there's not going to be trades either, Sure. And I think this could be a year where we see another Tyreek Hill type of trade where somebody, maybe Trent McDuffie of big name, is traded to make your overall roster better.
And I'm open to that as well. I think even if it is McDuffie, again, just specifically talking about number 9, even if they do move McDuffie, I think you're looking at having to reinvest in the cornerback room, and maybe that's trading McDuffie and letting Jalen Watson walk. That will change the order of the needs, but just kind of the pocket of where the talent looks to be in the top 10, I think that's going to be relatively consistent. And look, I think they are in decision-making territory on Rashee Rice pretty soon, and that might be like that would have to be a pretty big curveball, I think, because coming into this year, he seemed like a foundational piece, and now you're just kind of wondering what the future holds there one way or the other. But I think if anything, I don't think there's anything that they're going to be able to do pre-draft that will give you the new number 1 wide receiver or your new number 1 pass rusher, and that's what you'd be hoping to get at 9 if you do go receiver or edge.
I want to ask you this because what is your take on the Chiefs' offensive line? Is it great? Is it good? Is it just fine? Or does it need improvement?
It's better than it's getting credit for right now, and I understand why that's happening. A lot of people, you watch what the lines looked like to end the season, and you go, man, they just couldn't protect anybody. I'd say, yeah, you're right, because it was Creed Humphrey and Kingsley Suamataia and three dudes that were not on the radar before the season began. I think, and there's an asterisk here, of course, but I think the fully healthy version of this offensive line, and even with Jalen Moore at right tackle instead of Juwan Taylor for next year, I think that starting five is a pretty darn good group. I think what we saw from Josh Simmons when he was out there, I think is unbelievably encouraging. Like, again, if he's consistent, if he's that guy going forward, and if he plays 16 or 17 games a year, that's your offensive tackle, your left tackle for the next decade. If he's on that, not even if he takes huge leaps, if he just continues to evolve a little bit from what we saw this year, that's a solution. I think one of the best stories of this year was Kingsley Suamataia at left guard. That was a huge question mark coming into this year. We talked about it all the time. We were talking about Jalen Moore maybe being a guy who could kick inside if they need to. We talked about Wanye Morris maybe needing to compete at guard. And Kingsley took that job in a chokehold and never let it go for a second. I mean, really, really encouraging considering how hard his rookie season must have been on him to have that answer in year two. Really impressive. So I'm good at left guard. You're obviously good at center and right guard. You've locked those guys up long term, and then the combo of Jalen Moore and maybe Esapole now being kind of your swing tackle candidate, or heck, if Pole beats Jalen Moore in camp next year, and Jalen Moore just gets a really nice deal for 2 years being your number 3 tackle because young guys beat him out, that's okay. So I feel pretty good about the O-line group, and I think you've got long-term answers at 4 of those spots, maybe 5.
Yeah, and I think also, too, you look at that offensive line, and then you look at Patrick Mahomes. And Danon was on earlier and talked a lot about what Patrick needs to do to get better this offseason. How much does he need to improve this offseason?
I mean, it's tough because I do think there are some answers worth discussing, and then you also have to say, now do that while rehabbing a torn ACL or a repaired ACL at this point. So I do think that changes the math a little bit. I would love, and this has been true multiple times, and this is a combination of Mahomes and the coaching and the pass catchers and the O-line even to some extent, even though I just praised them for a couple minutes. I would love to see Patrick Mahomes come into next year or whenever he's available next year with a settled nature to him where it doesn't feel like things get sped up quite as easily, or he gets not thrown out of sorts. That makes it sound like he's, the worst versions of Baker Mayfield we've seen, or the worst versions of Josh Allen, with the interceptions and weird turnovers. That's not the problem. But he does get out of the rhythm a little bit sometimes when it feels like, and this is a little bit of a cliche at this point, I know, but when it feels like he doesn't quite trust what's going on around him, we saw the impact of those really struggling offensive lines in years past kind of speed up the clock in his head a little bit, and it felt like he wasn't always trusting his protection, and sometimes he would leave an okay pocket because he was used to bailing out of pockets by necessity. I think you've had times where the wide receiving group was really disappointing, and he started to lose some faith in his deep ball because they weren't being caught, losing some faith in guys being in the right place at the right time, so you lean on Travis Kelce even more because you know where he's going to be. Well, then Travis Kelce has a drops problem that turns into interceptions, and the cycle there continues. Then you have the schematic side of what is he seeing, what are opposing defenses preparing for all week, and have you evolved? Have you made anything easier on Mahomes in the running game? And the answer there has largely been no, or at least not enough for the way that the NFL moves so fast right now. So all of that to say, those are real factors that I believe do impact Patrick Mahomes in a very real way. And I think if you asked Mahomes, he'd say, yeah, I don't want to be as affected by the circumstances when things do get a little bit out of sorts. So I think this is an enormous offseason for the Chiefs to figure out how can we stabilize some of these pieces a little bit more, and then Mahomes has to be ready to take advantage of those when he comes back. Obviously, he's going to do it off of his shortest offseason ever in terms of what he can do with football things. He might not take the field until week 1 or, until practice leading up to that. And that's even kind of optimistic. So it's going to be really, it's going to be a hugely important offseason. And it's tough to point at Mahomes right now because the first thing he's got to do is get back on a field.
Yeah, kind of maybe the same question, but wide receiver 6'5" or running back like Breece Hall makes Patrick Mahomes better?
I think the Travis Kelce element of it is what makes me really lean towards the pass catcher, the number 1, whoever that next era is going to be with. One of the things that I was most hopeful to see this year was kind of that passing of the baton from Travis Kelce to Rashee Rice to give Mahomes one target that he can just rely on wholeheartedly, where the chemistry is there and the relationship is there and the talent and the focus and the execution and all of the effort, all of that comes together, where I didn't need Rashee Rice to suddenly be as good as the greatest tight end of all time, but you wanted him to really kind of clarify himself as the number one option.
Yeah.
No running back in this offense is ever going to be the number one option, nor should it. And that's not me saying they shouldn't invest in running back a little bit, but it's never going to be the number one thing you do. The number one thing you do is always going to be have Patrick Mahomes. So I really do think that right now, maybe there's a world where next year's the year for Rashee Rice, and maybe you do just cobble it together in a way that we've seen great quarterbacks deal with having a bunch of guys as opposed to the alpha surrounded by a bunch of guys. But, you know, the proverbial New England Patriots era Randy Moss unlocking the offense was something that we all remember for good reason. It wasn't all Julian Edelman and Wes Welker. Some of the most fun stuff for the greatest quarterback, the most decorated quarterback of all time, came when he had Gronk or Randy Moss. So I do still think that finding that real number one pairing for Mahomes, I think is still the thing that I want the most. Back. They need to have a running game that can take that burden off of Mahomes. That's another thing that a lot of quarterbacks have. Josh Allen, I'm sure you guys have talked about it, but Josh Allen had that this year in spades. He didn't have to be Superman because his running back played like Superman. So I do think that having a way to take a little bit of that burden off of Mahomes' shoulders in the running game, that is a real thing that they do need to solve this year. But I think that also happens if you ever give him a real number one wide receiver who you can say, hey, you know what? I'm going to throw the ball in this instance. I'm going to throw it up to Carnell Tate and let him make a play. He has not had a lot of guys able to do that during his time here.
No doubt. Gosh, I was going to ask you something, but I forgot what it was. Brisco, I'm hoping you're enjoying the time off. Get to have a whole offseason to kind of regroup and then get right back to it, man. We appreciate all the time you gave us this year and continue to do great things.
I had a blast. I thought for sure we'd be doing this at least a few more times.
Yep.
I was prepared to chat to you guys all the way till February, but that's how it goes, I guess. So thanks for having me again. We'll be in touch, I'm sure. If we do get the now we know the draft spot, I guess. If we get to Roger Goodell to say those beautiful words, the number one overall pick, the Kansas City Chiefs select Carnell Tate, wide receiver, Ohio State. You guys won't have to call me. I'll call you.
No doubt about it. We
Sounds
appreciate
good.
that. Sounds like a deal. We'll talk to you in April.
Thanks, fellas.